of time already, so I'd like to Co-Vi for inviting me again. So yeah, all these years I've been here on stage doing a myriad of talks, and I'm going to do another one for you today. So I'm going to talk about a journey I've been on for 3 years now, migrating a retail on-prem solutions to an integration platform using Azure Integration Services. So this time I came from quite far away, so like a little over a week ago I was still in Hawaii enjoying diving and stuff, so I found a new hobby. I used to do marathon running, but now it's diving, so I've been doing that. So yeah, that was kind of a great experience. And then I was back to the Netherlands and do some grocery shopping. So this is kind of the context I'm in today. Working for a retailer, but yeah, I usually do shopping. Any one of you do still like the good old-fashioned shopping, going to a grocery store? Probably many of you still do. Maybe you also use online services. So yeah, if you live in the Netherlands, you're probably familiar with Picnic or something like that, but also other grocery stores deliver the groceries to your doorstep. But yeah, traditionally you still would go to a grocery store. Yeah, and that's what I've been doing. So if you've noticed at the speech in the beginning by Slava, you've probably also seen that there was a quote from Joran van der Brink from Spar. And he collaborated together with me, and yeah, there was also a story out there, so a business case that you also find here. So there's an URL, so you can make a picture of it. So this is kind of what I started 3 years ago together with Joran and other people of starting migrating from what they have on-prem, and I'll dive into that, to something that's what you see here, and I'll explain that as well. So this is kind of what the journey is. I'm Steef-Jan Wiggers, for those who don't know who I am. So I'm an integration architect, so I've always been done integration, so back in the day with mainframes, web services, BizTalk server for years, and then the cloud. I also write for InfoQ. I don't know if some of you are familiar with InfoQ, so that's a global website, a lot of resources. It talks about cloud, talks about programming languages, architecture, and so forth. And I'm also what's called now an Azure MVP, so I've been in the community for quite a while. Okay, so let's dive into the story. Let's dive into that journey of getting to the platform we have today in Azure. So one of the first things, if you start doing that migration, right, you've got to have a starting point. There can be some requirements within that organization. So within that food retailer, they basically want to shift more of their assets into the cloud. So they started with financials. So that was Dynamics 365, and they still had kind of an on-prem broker present as well called New Way. So it's kind of similar to BizTalk's PubSub mechanisms, a database in there, canonical models that you can use. But it became a little bit outdated, and also the support became limited. So they wanted something in the cloud. So they were looking at certain parties like, hey, can you help us do this? So what you would do initially is do a discovery, prepare a proposal, identify what kind of building blocks you have, what type of roadmap or how you want to move forward, how you want to design that platform, how it's going to shape. And yeah, like you've heard in previous presentations, you always start small. So this is a similar case. We've started small as well. So what you see here is kind of a picture of how we started with that discovery phase. So it's in Dutch, but it basically comes down to, okay, where are we now today? How does that landscape look like? And how can we move forward to get something in the cloud? So kind of that's the initial approach that we've done. And the landscape looked like this. So you might have seen familiar stuff. There was a lot of scripting going on. There was this ESB in the middle of it, talking to different systems. And that's kind of what it was. And there was some integration already built around Dynamics 365 by a third-party partner. But the platform itself predominantly still resided on-prem. So you want to move forward, and because that on-prem platform, was kind of rigid, didn't really provide some of the flexibility that you need. Also because kind of what you see post-COVID or even during COVID, that more and more demand was there for the cloud, and even also for food retailers. Systems became outdated, and they wanted some kind of change and move forward with embracing what's available in the cloud to also bring more flexibility and support their businesses. And that will become apparent as long as I go along with that journey that I'm going to talk about. And the other thing is support for that New Way solution was also becoming more and more limited, because the initial people that built it's kind of a homegrown solution targeted for food retail, people moved, and it was not merely the original people that built it were left, so that's kind of a risk too. So if you talk about risk, there's certain of them. Support is one thing, flexibility not available is one thing. It became a bit of chaotic. You could see that in the landscape, right? All kinds of scripting and point-to-point coupling and so forth. So that's a challenge on one end. There's another challenge, of course, if you move forward to the cloud, because there's not really any reference to how do you do migration. You've seen the talk by Sandro. You got this talk, and then you can plot that to all kinds of Azure services. But that's not apparent when you look at, for instance, like a New Way solution. That's more like a homegrown one. Another challenge was when you still look at what that on-premise landscape looked like and all the process running through them, there was not really a good set of end-to-end monitoring or observability in place as well. So those are kind of what the risks we're looking at where we are. And then this might, I've presented before and kind of show these things. If you look at what are your functional building blocks, you got monitoring, you got DevOps, you got your infrastructure, and then at the core, you have your interfaces and your messaging and your APIs. So if you plot this to Azure, then most of these icons are probably familiar to as well. So in the center, you find what's probably depicted as an umbrella of services that are depicted as Azure Integration Services. That includes functions, logic apps, the messaging components, API management, that kind of stuff. And around it, you find services like Azure DevOps, Entra, Key Vault, some of the infrastructure components, and stuff like Azure Monitor and Application Insight. So those are like kind of our building blocks. See it as Lego, you want to build something, but then in the cloud. One of the things we decided on forehand is like, okay, what are our guidelines? How are we going to move forward? How are we going to build, our platform and move all those interfaces going forward? One of the things is that, okay, you want to go look at what's proven already. So the Azure Architecture Center or the Cloud Adoption Framework or Well Architect Framework kind of gives you already some of the guidelines and reference you can potentially leverage. The other thing is you want to be scalable. Some of those processes are more like batch-wise, so you distribute your article data to all kinds of subsystems. But the other ones are more like, your continuous order flow, because the retailer basically are consisting of all kinds of brick and mortar store going through, in this case, the Netherlands. But if you look at Spar in general, they're active in kind of multiple countries. So it's all the way up to the north. In north of Sweden you find them, but all the way down to the south in South Africa. Particularly, what I'm focusing here is the story we did in the Netherlands. But you need that skill as well. You need to be compliant. You need to have your documentation in place. You want to look what's fit for purpose and not always take the same components. Look what's fit for purpose and what you could use. One of the things we decided upon too, when you move forward, you want some kind of automation, central repositories, pipelines, packaging. So we kind of defaulted on, let's just embrace Azure DevOps. There's GitHub too, but we said, okay, we're going to leverage one capability, so we're going to be completely Microsoft, so you might as well just pick, Azure DevOps. And then the other thing is, when you look at that complete landscape and all these interfaces, that you kind of also do something like a domain-driven approach. So we kind of looked at all these interfaces and said, okay, we've got products, we've got assortment, we've got pricing, orders, finance. So we kind of chunk them up in all kinds of buckets, not literally, but virtually, and kind of said, okay, we spread these around, and then we take one of these domains and start moving them towards the cloud. So then you come to the design. So what I kind of want to talk you through is kind of, we set a bit of the pace of how we're going to do that cloud migration, but how we're going to design this. So one of the things, we started 3 years earlier, right? So Logic App consumption was there, but Logic App standard was not, still in preview, not GA. And the other thing was like, maybe we should just default over to using functions, a little bit more control and flexibility. The developer experience is just as good as what you get in Logic App Standard, but about 3 years back, it was like within Visual Code or Visual Studio, building functions was really, apparently really good and gave us some good developer experience and productivity. You had that easy integration with pipeline tooling. That's one of the things, the flexibility, handling some of the complex situations was easier because you have that, and also the cost effectiveness was there too, because you could choose some of the hosting capabilities available, consumption, or maybe even premium, and that in some scenarios can be cost effective if you compare that, for instance, with Logic Apps. Some of the components we use, another one was kind of Azure Redis Cache. You would wonder, okay, Redis Cache, yeah, but this is something we could look in some of our processes. When you do ordering, you want to know that the articles that are in that order are the ones that you can always service and are available in your warehouse management system. So basically are part of your assortment. Now, doing constant lookups and calls to dynamics not really that efficient and really really burdens that system because other processes are happening in that one as well. So if you offload that data and you basically put that data, for instance, in a Redis cache, then A, it becomes very fast, and B, you're not really burdening other systems, or in this case, dynamics. So that really helped us a lot in some of the cases of the processes we are supporting with our interfaces. So predominantly there was orders, but also assortments that are, because a retailer has different type of formulas. So you get your brick and mortars, you get city stores, you got stores in little neighborhoods, you got stores within gas stations, so you got the store and store principle, you got stores even within universities, or if you know, Spar is also active within holiday homes. So for instance, they also have little shops within the Landal holiday homes. So you might be familiar, if you live in the UK, you might see Spar as well, but also in other countries. Then another interesting component that we use is, of course, storage. Storage within the integration pipeline I will talk about a bit, but also for archiving purposes, and even going along, storage evolved by giving some kind of a capability called SFTP. So you could set up that SFTP capability within storage by making the option available within the data lake. So within the data lake, you got this option that making it an SFTP, and then we get this central SFTP capability. And instead of having our clients, or that sometimes want to upload data or allow data to be retrieved, not set up an SFTP server themselves anymore because we provide that capability, so we reverse it. So less burden for some of the third parties, and then we take that upon ourselves. So storage is a component in there too. Another one obviously is messaging because of the decoupling. We leverage the components service bus on one end, you'll see an example of that later on, but also event grip for our event mechanism in a push-push format and make it more efficient, and that's what we use in our integration pipeline. Then we've got API management because we kind of defaulted on two mechanisms. We kind of said if it's big files or batch-wise, we'll do SFTP between our third parties or systems, and if possible, because we want to go more to an API enabled ecosystem, we'll use API management also for secure data exchange. And what we use is kind of a mechanism you see here. You see it also from Learn. It's an OAuth mechanism which we use, and then the let's say functions behind them are using managed identity and so forth. So it's pretty secure, and it's a way of establishing, let's say, information from the outside that needs to go inside of Spar. Deployments, we do that of course with Azure, but instead of using ARM, we kind of initially already said, let's just use Bicep. And Bicep by that time was in an 0.4 version, supported by Microsoft, so we went forward by using Bicep instead of using ARM. The other thing is, as soon as you start evolving, having more and more interfaces on top of your platform you're building, you start to see that there's some reuse left and right available as well. At least you have some code that's like you could reuse in other of your interfaces. So we start using or leveraging artifacts and using shared packages for that. And the other thing which is important, who uses our ADRs as a documentation way of going forward, or even look at it in backwards when you made certain decision why you've done that. So this is kind of a way of creating documentation, put them in source control, so you easily could put them also in Azure DevOps. That kind of sets the stage for what you decide upon building up your platforms. You say, okay, we're going to do reuse, we're going to do asynchronous communication, we're going to do lookups, and so forth. So this is kind of an example of those ADRs that we kind of consolidated in Azure Wiki, Azure DevOps Wiki, I mean. So those are kind of just examples during that three-year journey of what we kind of got designing that complete platform in the cloud with Azure Integration Services. Now, how does that implementation look like? So one of the things, you've seen this picture before, this is kind of what I call an integration pipeline. So we leverage logic apps for its connectors and then offload that workload into a container. And then from that container, you can leverage some of those events like blob created, or you can do a custom type of event, but basically notifying a function saying, hey, there's something for you to process. And then one of the steps can be, hey, let's do some validation. Let's map it to a canonical data form, and from a canonical data form to whatever it needs to be distributed to. So it's already composable and flexible, and it can even add more functions to it. Let's say if there's some security mechanism I want to do, so maybe decryption, encryption, and so forth. So it's composable. It's a way of a kind of a claim check pattern you're probably familiar with. So instead of that the full workload goes to the function, basically the URL comes and then you can download it and you can do your processing. And also very suitable in a way to do some retries if necessary when it comes to delivery or some of the process in between. And the identification we apply to each of your steps using tags, and I'll get to that as well. So this is kind of what we call an integration pipeline, and it's predominantly used for most of our integrations, the articles, the orders, and so forth. An example, for instance, is one of those interfaces. So this is the pricing interface. So the pricing is basically done within Dynamics. Dynamics pushes out the pricing workload gets into a container, and then you go through that complete pipeline. There's some intermediate steps left and right as metadata is being pushed out. And eventually, like a pub/sub mechanism, it's distributed to all the subsystems that want those data. So that can either be a cash register, but it can also be a weigh scale. And it can also be that the prices need to be distributed, for instance, to Landal, because they need to price their articles within that store too. Another example is where API management comes into place as well, where transactions coming back into the platform and then it's being distributed or offloaded towards a data analytics platform. So that's another setup within that food retailer where they do a lot of analyzation with those transactions, but also for accountancy, etc. So what you basically see here is an example of a device that sends out a transaction. So that's a coffee machine. Those transactions ultimately land in a storage. They are archived and then offloaded to a container within the data lake. The thing is, what we did is that the integration platform ultimately did all the transportation and data and communication with subsystems, and then it also offloaded it to the data lake for the data team and vice versa. So the data team was only doing analytics and anything else with the data, while all the transportation was done by our integration platform. Another example is, because we still live sometimes in a world where you have hybrid, is that some of the information came from on-premise systems that being processed and then subsequently be pushed back to on-prem. And this could be a temporary solution as soon as the outer rims are also modernized, and then it's a complete cloud solution. But this is just an example of what we did in the cloud as well, just leveraging small parts of other automation into the cloud. Another challenge was with the old ways is monitoring and see where your processes are going. If you look at like what happened in an on-prem world, was that you kind of had to deal with event view or application logs. Sometimes you couldn't access it, didn't always have the context or alerting available. If you look at the complete process, some of the parts were instrumented and provided some of alerting, but not holistically. And this is something that we were asked to solve as well, moving forward to go building the solutions in the cloud, or at least all those interfaces. And what you see that all these domains are pushing telemetry data, APIs are doing it, and we even tried that some of those PowerShells still running in the cloud send off some telemetry data to a central place where we, for instance, could do some monitoring, or at least some notification if something went wrong. So what we did when building the solution is that we also had like observability in place from the start, so we thought about it. And then you come back to the things that you probably know if you did BizTalk in a way, is like this correlation ID that you could use to chain events together. So back in the day with BizTalk, you had this interchange ID that allows you to basically connect all those events together. What we did too is that we kind of chose for a set of metadata to have this rich set of metadata in a way to help us in alerting to find out where in that process something went wrong. So basically to really shorten that mean time to identify where's something going wrong and then subsequently deal with it. So this is a picture displaying this. So we did a presentation, I think a year or two ago at the Cosmos DB online conference where we showcased this together with some demos, so you probably still can find it on YouTube. It comes down to the fact that if you look at that integration pipeline, we're using tagging and stuff, and that, of course, all the telemetry with those functions goes in the application inside, but we also have that metadata we're pushing out through a service bus topic ends up in one or multiple subscribing functions, one offloading it into log analytics for potentially a Power BI, and the other one is that it was offloading those, let's say, events. So we're using Cosmos DB as an event source, and then through the change feed capability within Cosmos DB, we can inspect if there was something wrong, and then send that towards Topdesk, which is an incident management system. And within incident management system, we kind of created all kinds of action groups. So eventually some functional consultant within the food retailer could say, hey, there's something going wrong in this particular interface. Either we need to do something ourselves, or we may have to notify the people who built that integration and see what's going on by diving into the particular application insights. While building this platform, the world doesn't stand still, it just keeps rotating and going forward. So a lot of other things happened as well while building this platform, and there were some additional requirements or new interfaces that we kind of had to build as well. There's a lot of developments going on in the retail, so one would be electronic shelf labeling, dynamic pricing is a good example. If you look, and I'm going to mention it anyway, artificial intelligence, when you're using cameras, then you can ingest all that data and see what the walking patterns of your customers are, and then you can do something with the shelves. Or you can do also something with the fact that if people try to get products where you don't want to pay for, like so stealing kind of way, so that those are developments as well. When it comes to the retail, electronic shelf label is a good one. Another one is that the brick and mortar store starts to evolve into a different type of purpose that is also servicing online platform like Uber Eats. So you basically pick products and then you give them to a driver, and then he delivers kind of the groceries. That's a way. You got something like intelligent fridges, which is an example I will talk about as well in a minute, and you got like vending machines. So you got all kind of multiple ways of even online platform to generate more and more revenue for that particular grocery store. Another one is more something that happens inside the store, and it's called retail media. That's kind of supporting the campaigns or doing advertisements for first parties. So intelligent fridges does an example where you just put some of your fresh products inside a fridge. Then someone taps on with his credit card, opens it, and then can retrieve some of the products, and then those are really being invoiced. And the other thing is that within this solution, you can also monitor some of the products that are in there and reduce waste and potentially sell them for less within the store itself. So the way this solution looks like, that we kind of build those pipelines, integration pipelines, we kind of reuse those to send also master data towards those fridges so that the products and prices are available, but then on the other end, we're also retrieving the transactions that go back into data lake and subsequently go to accountants to represent what the kind of revenue is for that store. So besides migrating and moving all those interfaces, we'll also build these types of integrations on that platform. Another example is what's called a digital screen. So we're talking about retail mania. So you got all these type of screens that are placed in the store, so that it's placed, you know, at the entrance, but also placed near POS systems, so your cash registers. Doing campaigns for products, but also maybe do advertisement for third parties. Let's say an energy company could also do some ads right there. So instead of your traditional media where it's on the TV or on the leaflets, this is new because still, like many of you, are still going to that brick and mortar store to do groceries. So then, you know, that comes into your face. We start recently with building the solution, and one of the first things we build is that what they also wanted to display on those digital screens was the opening and closing times, but also what kind of services that are offered within the store. And then later on, we can also do the products and pricing, etc. The way the solution looks like here is, again, kind of that pipeline where you retrieve some of the data, then you cleanse it, and you push them into a Cosmos DB, and in the front of that Cosmos DB is a function allowing a third party through API management to retrieve that data. So what have we learned, during that 3-year journey? One of the things is that agile is key. So we did it in an agile way. We started small. We learned because we also made mistakes. And from those mistakes, we could evolve that platform and make it more robust. The other thing is that you have to identify what's important. So besides migrating those interfaces, we also were facing new requirements, and we built those too, but we also still had that migration, so we kind of have to prioritize things. Use evolution to your advantage, so that's one of the things we learned too. We learned that the storage offered that SFTP capability, that's an example that we leveraged. But even what I've learned today in these 2 days, like the end-to-end monitoring, something we can leverage as well, or the business process tracking. So what I'm kind of trying to say is that that platform we kind of built today and where it is now is still not finished. It still needs some maintenance, still needs some improvement, and there's still going to be new requirements because retail just keeps evolving. DevOps is important, also the culture around DevOps, meaning that if you make mistakes, you try to learn from those mistakes. That's important. Another thing is using that architecture design records and do your documentation, because that's key. That's something we found that's very important, and that's something you can really leverage, in this case, the Azure DevOps Wiki for. It's more like technical documentation, but it definitely helps us going forward. There's always going to be changes in the team, and you always want to look back, hey, what kind of decisions were made? Another thing that helped us a lot was this domain-driven design type of principles, where we can identify what kind of interface belongs to what type of domain. So that's something that helped us a lot as well. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. So if you want to connect with me, I've just put a QR code too. There's no documentation, anything. It just goes to my LinkedIn page in case you want to connect with me. You can follow me on Twitter. I'll be still around if you've got some questions around building platforms, migrations, or the retail. So with that, enjoy the coffee in a minute.